And we will go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the first of our 3 webinar series for spring 2024 with UK Libraries and the School of Information Science. I am Ashley DeWitt. You all know me as the admissions coordinator for the Library Science program. And I am joined here by 3 very special panelists. Would you all like to introduce yourselves, please?
Sure, I can get started. So, hello everyone. Thanks for being here, whether you're here today or you're watching this video later on. I am Dr. Stacey Greenwell. I'm the Coordinator of Educational Services for UK Libraries. Also, perhaps most importantly, I'm a liaison librarian, and I do happen to be the liaison librarian for the School of Information Science. So I hope you will feel free to reach out to me at any point throughout your career. If you have questions about using the library or academic libraries or just whatever I can help with. I'll turn it over to you, Jen.
Okay, thanks, Stacey. Hi, everybody. I'm Jen Bartlett. I am currently an oral history librarian at the Louis B. Nunn Center for Oral History, which is a part of the Special Collections Research Center at UK Libraries. But I've served in a number of different roles during my almost 17 years here at UK Libraries, including head of circulation, head of reference services, associate dean for public services, and other things as well. So I can highly recommend that you talk to Stacey as a resource. I think she's an excellent colleague and excellent liaison, and you can certainly get a lot out of talking to her. But really, any of us are happy to help you with library questions and certainly talking about careers. And I'm really happy to be on this panel this evening. Helen?
Hi, my name is Helen Bischoff, and I am a recent addition to UK Libraries. I started in July of 2023. I'm the coordinator of liaison services. I'm an alum of the UK School of Information Science, not recently, but I guess I've been in libraries and academic libraries for about 17 years. So I've worked in public, private, mid-size, and community colleges. So I've worked in a lot of different academic library settings. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about that or just about like the library field in general. I am an ex-high school teacher who went to library school to get her school media certification initially, and then just got pulled into higher ed, which I love and enjoy. So I can also talk about the interview process from other perspectives and how it differs from other fields.
Thank you all so much. I think a great place to get started is, where do I even go to look for academic library jobs? Which listservs, which job sites should I be looking at?
Okay, well, I can start with that one. I think a likely suspect would be the American Library Association job list, because it does have a number of different jobs for various library settings, including academic and public and K through 12 and special. So I think the ALA job list would be one of the top sources that you should always be checking for library positions. But then there are also other listservs that are useful depending on what kind of job you're looking for, such as academic and special and public and so on. So Stacey, do you have a few of those that you would recommend?
Well, the Association for Research Libraries, ARL, is also a good place to look if you are looking for a larger research institution. They tend to post their jobs on that site. Of course, your School of Information Science listserv, pretty much anything in Kentucky will probably end up there, if not other institutions. And I know there's a lot of email on that list sometimes, but that is a great place to look for jobs.
And I'll jump in and add, like, if you are looking like in a very specific region, like looking at your regional organization. So like in Kentucky, the Kentucky Library Association, if you know that you want to be a school librarian in the state of Kentucky, or like maybe it's Colorado or Florida or wherever it is, all of those states have a centralized, if you're looking for public, a centralized public search for all K-12 listings, and you can limit to school librarian or school media specialist. They list it in both ways.
Yeah, another thing I would add to that is that many times if you can go to a conference, for example, either a regional conference or something from a larger association like an ALA conference, like ACRL, or the Public Library Association conference, for example, if you're looking for public library positions. We're sort of lucky this year in that PLA is having its conference in Columbus, Ohio, which is not too far up the road in April. And usually these larger conferences will have a career center, and they will have career listings. You can go ahead and sign up and make an appointment with potential employers online. And the career center will also sometimes offer a resume review, interview practice, and sort of mini mentoring suggestions. And usually as a student, you can get discounted registration rates for these conferences. And so there's, any number of good listservs, such as my colleagues have mentioned. I will also say Special Libraries Association also has a really good careers site, as Helen mentioned, the state associations. But, if you can get to a conference and see people face to face and they can see you, then that gives you something of an advantage.
And Jen, you brought up using those resume services, which is a great segue into my next question, which is how do I make my cover letter and my CV effective and memorable? What are employers looking for? What would you be looking for on a search committee?
Well, I can start with that one. So I didn't talk a lot about my background in my introduction, but I have been at UK Libraries for 23 years in a variety of different jobs. I have served on, I don't know how many search committees, including hiring more than one dean of libraries. So I've seen a lot of cover letters at a lot of different levels. And if nothing else, fit your skills to the job. So I know when you're applying for jobs, it's kind of tempting to send out the same cover letter because it does take time to write a really good cover letter. But when I look at a cover letter, it's great that you are highlighting all of your accomplishments, but, I've seen that in your CV, which we'll get to, but what can you do to help me with the needs that I have, the position that I've posted, or my institution, what are the things that you can offer? So connecting your experience with what's in that job ad, using the language of that job ad, if you can, in that cover letter. And again, that does take time to do that, but that always impresses me when I see that someone has taken the time to do a little bit of research and to really think about how their skills would translate into a particular job.
I think that's a good point. And I will also say that I also worked in public libraries before I went into academic and have done a number of searches, including for directors and deans. And one thing I would add to what Stacey has said is that search committees put together, requirements and for these job ads fairly carefully. I mean, we're looking at what we want. And if the search committee says your cover letter should be no more than 2 pages, don't write more than 2 pages. I don't want to see 10 pages of a cover letter if I asked for 2. Not that it's not interesting what you're talking about, but as Stacey said, I've seen your CV and I know that. And what it says to me is you write 10 pages. If I ask for 2, that you're not paying attention to the instructions that I gave you. So what does that say about what you'll do when you actually come to work here, right? So the only purpose of that cover letter and resume is to get you in the door. That is your ticket to get an interview. So be sure that you pay very close attention to what that job ad wants and follow that as much as possible.
And I agree with everything Stacey and Jen also mentioned. One thing that I will say is that I've seen a lot of candidates say, oh, I shouldn't apply for this because I don't meet every single thing in the job description. It's great if we can find a candidate who can, but I think potential and demonstrating your skills is also equally important. So maybe you don't have every bit of experience that is preferred. And that's okay. It's preferred. It's not required. I would encourage you to do exactly what Stacey and Jen has said, is like, look closely at the description. What is it they're asking for? And how do your skills map to it? So in a lot of ways, it's like building a lesson plan. You're like mapping your skills to the objectives of the job. So you can do like a backwards lesson plan design with your skill set and the job. Does it match? Does it not? Is it pretty close? Are there areas where you haven't had opportunity to gain that experience? That's okay. Do you have experience that can speak to it? So I think that's one of the most important things that I look for, is like, how thoughtful are you in reading the job ad and mapping your skills to it specifically? But maybe you don't have like 15 years of experience, but you have experience maybe in other avenues where those skills translate. That's something that I find valuable. And it's a skill set, I think, that's hard to teach. And whenever you have someone that does it in a cover letter, I'm like, this is somebody that knows how to think, learn, and grow. And this is somebody that I would want to work with.
I think it bears mentioning the difference between a resume and a CV, because a CV is often what we're looking for in academic jobs, right? Anybody want to tackle that?
Yeah, there are different things that search committees are going to look for. If you're working, if you want to work in an academic library, a CV will be required, and a CV is basically a long form resume that will list, more of your, academic oriented accomplishments, such as your education, of course, but then the positions that you've had, any publications, presentations, invited presentations, and so on. So you get more into in-depth in a CV. It can be challenging to write either, though, because a resume is shorter, but then you have to pack more depending on where you are in the stage of your career into a shorter document. So regardless of which you are asked for, a resume or a CV, and sometimes with academic positions, you'll be asked for both. You'll be asked for a long form CV, and you can ask for a shorter one as well. And so in either case, you do need to go through, as Stacey was saying with the cover letter, you do need to go through and be very careful to say, this is what this position is really asking for. And I need to make sure I'm addressing that in my CV or resume.
Absolutely. And I like to describe the CV as your academic record, your career record. So I do work with a lot of graduate students who ask me to take a look at their CV. And, sometimes they might leave off an honor or an award from their undergraduate, and it was fairly recent. And, you can leave those things on there. I mean, it is your academic record. And over time, some of those types of things might come off of your CV, but not necessarily. I mean, it is a record of your accomplishments. And so it does differ from the resume in that the resume is usually a bit more targeted and doesn't necessarily include all of those types of things, like conference attendance, or if you gave a poster session or something, you certainly want to include things like that on a CV.
I know, depending on what type of librarianship you're moving into or what field, like with school librarians, a lot of times they would ask for a resume, but then you had to have a teaching philosophy that accompanied it, because everyone who is a school librarian in a public school also had to get a teaching certificate. So depending on where you're applying, different pieces might be required as part of that like resume. Because I remember applying in the K-12 system and having like a short form resume, but then they wanted this really lengthy like statement of teaching and my pedagogy. So it depends like where you are. That was an experience I had with school libraries. But Stacey and Jen, I don't know, like have you seen many academic jobs that require like a philosophy of teaching? for academic library jobs, depending on the role.
I have seen a few of those where you might, once you're in the job, it's more likely that you might be asked as part of a dossier, which that's another thing for another time, but you might be asked to give your teaching philosophy at that point, once you're actually in the job.
Mm-hmm. And it's more likely that a philosophy of some sort of service would be addressed during a presentation. So I think we'll be getting to that later during the interview, interview tips section, but usually not in the documentation will you be asked for a philosophy, but it will more than likely come out in any kind of presentation that you do during the interview process.
Which is another excellent segue, but I did want to say first, to Jen's point earlier, it is important that you pay attention to what the job has asked for regarding a resume or a CV. If they ask for a specific format, give them that format. But my next question is, what is the interview process like? What should students be preparing for? They've gotten to the short list, they're coming to campus. What happens next?
Well, I'm wondering, Helen, since you've worked in different settings, if you could talk about maybe, the non-academic library interviews that you've had experience with.
Yeah. So with teaching in K-12 or with school librarianship, those interviews are usually 20 to 30 minutes. And it is a committee, I guess the last one, trying to think of the two that I was on, I probably had about 10 to 12 people on the panel. You walk in, you sit down, they fire off their questions, and you get up and you walk out, and the next candidate is sitting there. Typically, you're sitting kind of in an outer room with a group of candidates. So you literally know who your competition is. And so sometimes you bump into colleagues. So like in school libraries, or at least in K-12 in Kentucky, that has been my experience. It's very brief, but they cover a lot of ground. They want you to give tangible examples, like how would you approach this, and give me an example of how you have done it or would do it. And you don't get the questions ahead of time. In some interview circumstances, you do. When I worked at a private university, we sent the questions out to candidates ahead of time that the search committee had. That's a practice we have here at UK libraries too. But in K-12, it's pretty much you show up, you hope you've prepared for the right questions, but it is very quick. So you have to be pretty succinct in your responses in K-12. And that's generally like how it is, because they are trying to hire hundreds of people at one time. It's usually at the start of a school year or at the break, typically at the break of semesters. They're doing like just giant hirings. And so they'll do interviews all day long. So like you'll be coming and going and seeing like all the other candidates there. For other interviews, I guess most of my other interviews have been in academic libraries. That would be the example that's outside of it. So like teaching in K-12 or school libraries, both of those experiences are, I would say, the antithesis of an academic library job experience, which I'll let Stacey and Jen speak a little more to.
So that probably is one of the most surprising things. And for those of you, you've applied for jobs and you've done interviews in whatever field you might happen to be in right now, academic library interviews are generally at least one day long, sometimes more. It depends on the institution. So you will generally be asked to give a presentation at an academic library interview. You will also meet with a number of different groups of people, typically. So the search committee, for one, the department that you might be working in, you may meet with individuals such as, the associate dean or the director of the area that you're looking at, the dean or director of the overall library or library system you may meet with. You may meet with HR, promotion tenure committee, if it's a tenure granting institution. There could be a variety of people that you meet with. You will almost certainly have meals. Hopefully they'll provide you with lunch, right? But that will also be part of the interview too. There will be different individuals at your lunch and or dinner meetings, people that you might be working with in the future. So, there'll be a lot of different people throughout the day, and it can be kind of a whirlwind of people that you experience and have an opportunity to talk with.
Mhm. And I'll just speak to my experience with public library interviews, because before I went to work in academic libraries, I interviewed at a few public libraries. And I would say it kind of falls between Helen's experience and then the academic process that Stacey was talking about. It takes longer than 2 hours, I would say, to interview for a public library job, but it's not really a full day. I would say more like a half day, where you're, meeting the people you would work with, your supervisor. You get to see the place where you would be working and see some of your coworkers, but it would not typically involve a presentation or meeting with different constituencies. It's generally not as involved as that.
Something I will add is depending on the size of the institution you're interviewing at. So I was at 2 private, small liberal arts colleges. And in those experiences, both times I met with both the provost and the president of the university. In one of those, I was a non-tenure track faculty member. In the other, I was staff, but it was still a position that did enough teaching that the provost and the president met with every librarian who was a candidate there. So depending on the size of the institution, you may be meeting with like top level administration, which that's like a whole other, like, how do you prepare for that? Typically, in my experience with every single one of those administrators, they just want to talk about how much they love libraries and like a library story from their childhood. And so what did I do? I let them tell that story. I was their catcher in the rye. I was like, let it out. I will take it. They usually don't ask a lot of interview questions in my experience across those 2 institutions, but they did have me meet with people who were higher up in the administration.
Now we've talked about there is a presentation. So how do we prepare for that as academic library job candidates? What are we trying to do for our committee?
Well, I would just say first, they will usually give you a prompt, and it might be a question or just something they want you to talk about. So, and it's probably going to be broad, but make sure you stick to the prompt as best as you can. And also, just another tip, and throughout your interview, keep to whatever time you're given. So if they say a 20-minute presentation, you probably should practice it and make sure it's 20 minutes. Just, and when we talk about interview questions and things a little bit later, budgeting your time, making sure that you're not taking too long on questions. And in a presentation, you will typically maybe have a 20-minute presentation followed by 10 minutes of questions. So, open audience questions. You want to be careful not to talk too long in responding to each of those questions so that other people have an opportunity to ask questions. So, I mean, it can be challenging to manage time and all that, but it's important. People do notice those things. So yeah, practicing your presentation, maybe, practicing it with someone, rehearsing it. I really think those things are important.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Sort of along the lines of, the cover letter, not writing the 10-page cover letter. This is related to that. These search committees, especially for academic settings, are on a very tight timeline. You have to meet with a number of different people and different groups. And if you get behind, that's a problem. So if you're asked to talk for 30 minutes with a 15-minute Q&A, that should be your target. Regarding the Q&A, it is entirely possible that people won't have questions, or they won't have many questions. And then you have the big awkward silence where you're all standing there staring at each other, and we don't want that. So I would suggest that for your presentation, you also prepare maybe 2 or 3 questions that you can ask the audience, after you give them time to, ask, well, why do you want this job? And why do you see yourself here? And all that stuff. Ask them, follow up with something in the presentation. So what do you think about this point that I brought up during my presentation? And how does this fit into your institution? So I would really like to know. Show some curiosity. This is the only chance that many people in that organization are going to have to see you. So you want to actually interact with them. They might not be involved in the lunch or any kind of reception or whatever. This is their chance to talk to you. So you want to model the behavior that you're going to show once you work there, and you want to come across as curious, you are interested in them, and you want to know what they think. So have some questions ready. And the only other thing I'm going to say about this is, although this might be really obvious, dress for an interview. There was one interview in particular where the interviewee showed up in jeans and a t-shirt. No matter how casual you think this organization is, you dress for an interview, dress in business casual. Do not show up in jeans and a t-shirt, because I can guarantee you the minute that person walked in the room, it didn't matter what this person said. It was just completely inappropriate.
So speaking about interview questions, what should our students be prepared to answer? And what kinds of questions, Jen, you sort of touched on this, should they be prepared to ask?
Well, I think the very first question is they need to know why they have applied to this job, and they need to know why this institution. That's always, I mean, that's a classic question that every candidate is asked, is why this institution, why this job? If you haven't thought about either of those, well, that's going to be an awkward silence. You don't want that. You want to really be intentional and like think about why you're applying somewhere, why that particular position is appealing to you. And that's also a question that any candidate can ask a search committee or anyone they meet with during the interview process is, why are you here? Like, what is appealing about this organization? Why should I want to be here? And I've asked this question before. I asked this question in my search committee at UK. I sent them my questions ahead of time. They shared their questions with me ahead of time. So I had a list of like 6 questions that I shared with the search committee too. And that was the first one on it, is like, why UK? And what is it about this organization that you weren't able to find elsewhere? Like, that's what I wanted to know from them. Like, I wanted to know why they were there. And a lot of them had been there for multiple like decades. So I wanted to know why that was appealing. And that was important to me, is to understand their why, specifically with that institution. So I think that's always a question you can ask, and one you definitely need to be prepared to answer.
Yeah, I will say that, it has not been my personal experience that you get the questions ahead of time, or that you're able to submit questions. So I think organizations do it different ways at different times. So you have to be able to, in many situations, just really think on your feet. And I think, why you want to work at this organization is really just an excellent question that you need to be prepared for. But, one other thing that employers will do, and that you need to be prepared for, are these scenario-based questions. They want to get at, how are you going to handle a particular situation? And so it's things like, what was the situation you were faced with? What role did you play in this situation? What steps did you take to solve the problem or deal with the situation? And then what was the result? And so that's to get at, how would you handle things in this organization? So I would suggest that you go through and you think of these sort of touchstone points, like, I had this difficult patron, or I had a book challenge that I had to deal with, or I had a safety issue, or this was something I really did well. And think of those scenarios, what you're going to be saying. But also, what I would suggest you do is pay attention to those questions that they ask, because usually when they're asking that question, that is something that you're going to have to deal with. They wouldn't ask this question if they didn't want to know. So how are you going to deal with a difficult patron? That is probably something that you are going to run into in this situation. Or, how would you handle, insufficient budgets to do what you want to do in, public library setting, for example? It's like, oh, I might have to deal with that. When you're in this interview setting, I think the important thing to keep in mind is interviews are two-way. They're not just one way. I mean, the employer is certainly asking you if you're going to be a good fit, but you need to be asking at the same time, is this place going to be a good fit for me? Because that is just as important, if not more important, than what the employer is saying. So you have to be thinking, is this a place where I would feel at home? Or is this a good fit for me and my career goals? And so these questions will sort of give you some insight into that.
Jen, I couldn't agree more with that. That was actually the next point I was going to make is you are interviewing this institution as well. So have questions ready. Ideally, you will be given an itinerary ahead of time. So you'll see the types of groups that you're meeting with. Maybe you're meeting with the instruction department or the reference department, or, depends on what type of job that you're looking at. But try to have some questions ready for each group, or questions that could work across many groups. Kind of a red flag to me is when we're in a meeting and the interviewee has no questions at all and we end early, and it's just awkward silence, and they don't want to ask anything about the institution or what we like about. That's a very simple question. What do you like about working here? What do you most like about this institution or about this library? There are always questions you could ask of the particular group that you're meeting with. So have a lot of those ready, and they will give you some insights into the institution to see, how well you think you would fit there.
I'll add something to that as somebody who sits into a lot of interviews, is that you can also ask about the city, especially if you're interviewing in a state or in a city that you're not very familiar with. Ask about things that are important to you. If you really like knowing that you're going to have natural spaces, ask about the parks, ask about the green spaces, ask about the food scene, or what kind of entertainment comes to town. If you're stuck on a question, you can always start there, because people are happy to tell you about the things that they'll do in their free time. And that'll give you a chance to listen, learn that information, but also to kind of reframe and rest and recharge, and then think about some of the job related questions that you want to ask too. It's a nice breather for you to get to ask those questions and let people talk for about 10 minutes. And then you can resume with some harder hitting questions too. Do you all have anything else to add about interview questions or what the candidate should be prepared to answer?
I have one that I think can be a helpful one to ask.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it, like to Jen's point, like when they ask you specific questions, it's because you're probably going to have to deal with those things in some way, shape, or form. So something that I have asked in interviews is if you could change something about the organization as it currently functions, like depending on what group you're talking to, ask them what changes they would like, or they would like to see down the road. Or you can ask the question about what direction do you see this program, department, or depending on who you're talking to, because it's great to get that different insight from those different groups, because you can ask that single question to every group all day long, and you're going to get probably a variety of answers. So it gives you a better scope of maybe if people are talking to each other in the organization, maybe they aren't. And you can kind of better see, like, what is this organization like? And you can also maybe assess communication. So if everyone has a different plan or idea, it's like, I wonder if they've talked to each other. And so those are questions that you can ask as a follow-up as well. Like, oh, well, in my other meeting, we talked about this. Is this something that you see as a valuable change or movement for this future of this program? So those are also helpful follow-up questions too, to help you decide if that institution is a good fit.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think Helen's right on point. I think the most difficult thing that you're going to need to determine during an interview is the work culture. I mean, it's going to be pretty straightforward what the job is all about. I mean, if you're an instructional librarian, you basically know what an instructional librarian does. Data management, whatever reference, whatever it happens to be, because you've got a job description. What the big challenge is is what is this work culture going to be like? And they are never going to tell you. If you come out and say, so what's your work culture like? Oh, we're all very collaborative and we communicate all the time. And everybody has some kind of, stake in the decision, and we want to know everybody's opinion. That's not always true. So they're not necessarily going to say that. So the challenge for you in your questions is to try to get at that information. So, I mean, in addition to some of the questions that Helen and Stacey had, which I think are just excellent, you should be able to say, okay, so what are the biggest strategic goals for this institution? They should be able to tell you. If they can't tell you, then that's a problem. What are the biggest challenges do you think I would face in this position? Again, they should have a ready answer for that. What is most surprising, do you think, that people, when they come here, that they discover after 6 months or so? What is that? If you're having an interview, a one-on-one with a person who will be your supervisor, which you should definitely have, ask them, how would you describe your management style? Because this is the person you're going to be dealing with the most. And if you can tell that their management style and your preferred way of working is not really going to mesh, then that's just a warning sign. I mean, it's not, a deal breaker necessarily, but it's something you need to be aware of. What is this position going to be like day by day? And are you going to be happy with it? Are you going to be satisfied with that? So I would just suggest if you just feel that something is perhaps it needs more clarification, this is your time to ask it. You ask questions of everybody that you can, come to contact with to get as much information as you can.
Okay, I just want to follow that up and say, Jen, I wish I had you in my life 17 years ago when I went to my first interview. Like, this is golden. Like, this excellent advice. Thank you, Stacey. Thank you, Jen.
Well, thank you, but we've all been there, right?
I was like, oh my gosh, this would have been so helpful the first time I did this process.
Yeah.
And that is why this panel is so valuable. I wondered if any of you could talk about some things that you've seen candidates do that really impressed you, whether you were part of a search committee or you were in one of those maybe meal meetings or a presentation. What really was such a green flag for you looking at candidates?
Well, one thing, and I mean, this should be sort of obvious, but the amount of research that someone does about an institution, you should always do your research. But the people who have done a lot of research, who have, looked at the university's strategic plan, who are somewhat familiar with, maybe building projects that are going on campus, or what the university is, they're looking to grow their undergraduate enrollment, or they're developing new programs. And again, I know these things take a lot of time for busy people, but they do make you stand out, that you have taken the time, that you seem like you really want this job. And yes, I know I was a grad too a long time ago, and I could remember, any job would have been great, but I think it's important that that committee and the people that you're dealing with at that institution see that you really want this job, that you have done the work, that you are excited about this institution. And yes, you can ask those questions throughout the day and get a sense of maybe this isn't the institution for you, but at least coming in and being very prepared. Also, I mentioned this earlier, and it should be kind of obvious too, but staying on time, excuse me, staying on time with your presentation, with your questions, good, strong, confident time management. And, I like that when I see a candidate who is able to effectively deal with the time that they're given.
Yeah, those are good. That was at the top of my list. Have done your research about this institution. And when you come in and ask questions about the institution, don't ask obvious questions that you could have gotten off the website. Like if you're interviewing at an academic institution, don't say, so how many branch libraries do you have? Well, that is something that you should have been able to get from the website. But just intelligent questions that show you've been paying attention to what goes on during the interview. You should always have questions. Just, make something up. They will say, do you have any questions for us? Always have questions. Never say, no, you covered everything. that's a real red flag for me. But also another thing that's kind of impressive, I think, is, when we ask, well, do you have any questions for us? Make it a little bit personal. Just say something like, so how long have you been here at this institution, or what kind of roles have you had? And sort of getting along the lines of what I think Helen was talking about earlier, that, showing some personal interest or personalizing things a little bit more by asking about them and showing some interest in what they're doing and why they're at this institution. And then also at the end, always say, sort of be very active about this. Don't be obnoxious to say, oh, well, when can I find out that you hired me or something? Or, how much would I be paid in this position? Those are questions that you should never ask. But general things like, what is your general timeline now for making a decision? And is there anything else that you need from me? Is there any other information you need from me? In other words, being active as the interviewee, saying, okay, I have this to offer. What can I do for you? Because basically this is what they're looking for. What can you do for them in this position? And so you'd be sort of wrapping up the interview on that positive, active note.
Something that I've seen candidates do, and I don't think this is a requirement, you all have probably seen it too, is like after an interview, like a follow-up thanking the institution for hosting you. That's something that I have done. I have received thank yous from candidates. And I've seen candidates send thank yous to like multiple people that they met with across the campus. And it's not the thank you that's so impressive. It's the fact that they were taking notes about who they met in a situation that's already pretty long and exhausting, but they were taking note of who they met and what they were learning throughout the day. And so don't be afraid to take notes. Like when somebody comes in and doesn't take a single note, I'm like, are you going to remember all that? Maybe they will. Maybe they will, but don't be afraid to take notes. It's something that I think is pretty common and expected in most search committees because you are being given a lot of information that maybe you wouldn't be able to get from a website. And if this is going to be a decision you have to make later, you want to have the best information to make the best decision you can at that time. So don't be afraid to take notes and ask those more probing questions like Stacey and Jen have already asked, because work culture, until you're in it, I mean, you really want to learn as much as you can. There's no way to know exactly what it is until you're in it, but ask all the questions you can to try to get at those behaviors and that work culture.
What Helen said, it reminded me of something sort of related, that you never know what you're getting into until you're in it. Also, when you're interviewing people, you really never know what you're getting until they get there. The best interview, I was on a committee for, it was at a different institution, not UK, and this candidate came in, gave a stellar interview. It was the best interview I'd ever seen. So much research, and this person knew all the answers to all these questions. The reason that they were so good at that interview is because they'd interviewed so many times before, and they'd worked at so many institutions. And their time at those institutions were not necessarily all that successful. And so they left and they had to interview again. So you just never know what you're getting until you're into that situation. But that means, I mean, you could just do all the research you can, right? But there's no way you're ever going to know everything about an employer, and there's no way they're ever going to know everything about you. So just do the best you can and make the best decision you can with the information that you have.
And Jen, Helen, you touched on my last set of questions already, which is what is the kind of general timeline for academic positions and hearing back? And then Helen and Jen, if you could speak to your experience in other types of institutions and how that might be similar or different.
So timelines have varied a lot across the academic institutions I've worked at. Smaller institutions have less bureaucratic red tape because they're small. So I would usually get notified. The smaller the organization, the quicker the notification came in my experience. in larger institutions, in public institutions, and so like I'm talking about the mid-size university I worked at, and then the community college, those timelines varied wildly. Like one was 3 months. It took 3 months because like they started it and then they froze it temporarily, and then they thawed it out, I guess, and then they made an offer like 3 months later. Other timelines, I have been notified as quick as 2 weeks, but I mean like 2 weeks to 3 months. Like it was kind of I would say all the institutions I worked in, 2 months or 2 weeks to 3 months, 3 being the longest, 2 being the shortest. And then sometimes like offers would fall somewhere in the middle. So this could be an interview question as well. How many candidates are you interviewing? I've had candidates ask if they are the first to interview because that gives them an idea of timeline as well. Because if you're the first to interview and then you have 2 more interviews coming, well, you're probably not going to get an offer in 2 weeks because interviews are still occurring. So I think timelines are going to be dependent on a few factors, like how large the organization is, how many people have to sign off on it, and then, also how many people are involved in the decision just period. Because I've been in situations where it's a very brief amount of time. They already, like I was the last person. And so that expedited the timeline. So I think it depends on where you fall in a search committee's interview process, and then also the size of the institution, or at least that was my experience. In K-12, they will call you like 48 hours later if you're the last person, like they will call you immediately. But in academic libraries, it's never been that quick.
Yeah, in
Yeah,
academic libraries, there are often so many different people that have to sign off. So your search committee, once they've interviewed all the candidates, will get together and talk about the candidates. They probably will take feedback from people who have participated in your interview process. That could be people who've attended your presentation or some of the groups that you met with. So they will go through that feedback. They will talk amongst themselves. Then they might write out, strengths and areas for improvement for each candidate and pass that along perhaps to the supervisor or to a dean or director, the individual who's ultimately making the decision. Then it might need to go to an HR department. It could go, the larger the organization, there may be a number of people who have to sign off on something before you even get that offer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I mean, I think you should ask, because they can't string you along for months and months. I mean, you have things to do, and this is not the only organization out there that you could work with. And again, this is a two-way process. So if they are making you wait for months, that's, I think, unreasonable. So I think you should ask them, how long do you think I would, reasonably expect to hear back from you? And then they should give you some kind of answer. But my experience has been very similar to Helen's. My first job, my academic job at Murray State, I interviewed at an ALA conference, and they just had to hire somebody because somebody had left and they needed somebody for the school year starting in August. And so I had a job offer in a week because that was their particular situation. But here at UK, it takes a lot longer. So it does depend on the situation. But again, I mean, they should not string you out for months and months. That is a problem. And again, that's a point of information for you. If that does happen, then perhaps that is an organization that you might want to think, pretty carefully. If they do offer you the job, do you really want it? If they are going to treat you like that. So that's something to consider.
Do any of you have any final thoughts to share before we open the floor for questions?
Actually, yeah, I do have one other thing I was thinking about this afternoon. Where job hunting, I think, is, I mean, you want a job, everybody wants to get a job, that's why you're in library school, but really it's an ongoing process. You should always be thinking about what jobs are out there if not for you, then for your colleagues, because one thing we haven't really talked about all this much is contacts. And right now in library school, you're developing all these contacts. These are your colleagues, regardless of where you end up, in what kind of library you end up. The relationships you're making right now in class, these are your colleagues. And so you want to maintain these relationships and build new relationships. So if you see jobs that you think might be good, even if you're not looking for a job right now, but you think one of your colleagues might like it, you reach out to them and you sort of build these relationships where if they see a job that might be good for you, then, vice versa. So I think you should always be thinking, have that career mindset, because you never know what opportunity is going to come up for yourself and then for others.
That's such a great point. Madison, did you have any questions in particular that you wanted to ask the panel?
I don't think so. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you all so much for taking time. If anybody has any other final thoughts, we still have 8 minutes to speak to the students. But I think this has been really helpful, and we'll work on getting the captioning corrected and up on our YouTube channel and then posted in the Student Hub so that all the other students can benefit from seeing this as well. So any final thoughts before we say goodbye for the evening?
Well,
Hang in there.
reach out to your librarians. Definitely reach out to any of us and any librarian you know who's been through the process. I found this to be a very open profession, and people are always willing to sit down and talk and share. So don't be afraid to do that. And then the last thing is don't be afraid to ask to practice. Like if you need to practice a mock interview, if you've never done it before, anywhere, in any context, in any profession, like ask one of your colleagues in your class, talk to your professors about it. And then also you have all of us now, and any librarian that you have connections with, don't be afraid to ask them for that type of support. In general, I found the librarianship profession to be very supportive with regard to like job prep.
Absolutely. And sometimes students will reach out to me as, being your liaison librarian, and maybe they want to talk to someone at UK Libraries who's in a particular type of job. And yeah, as Helen said, people are generally very generous with their time when we're working with students. And so chances are I could probably, or one of us could probably connect you with someone who's in the specialty maybe that you're interested in.
Yeah, definitely find the person that has the job you want and talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the great benefits of UK is that we have so many professional librarians doing so many cool things that there's always somebody to talk to. So yes, definitely encourage all of our students, reach out. We have all of these great professional experts here to help. And also, shameless plug, this is the first of the webinar series, but we do have 2 more, one in March and one in April. So if you have not signed up and you're interested in those, I will make sure that we link the sign up form when we put the video out. But for now, thank you all so much for joining us this evening, and we will see you back for the next webinar. Have a good evening.
Thanks.
Bye.